Hello, and thank you for joining BIMxt Network. My name is Dana Tafilipi, coming to you from my home office in Virginia. For those of you who do not know me, I'm a BIM technologist at Smith Group, advisor for the Revit DC user group, and speaker at national BIM conferences. Today, we have a wonderful meeting, but first we have 5 user groups along the East Coast that have come together to bring you this. Oh, am I not sharing? Yes. To bring you this network presentation. We have a wonderful group of advisors who help us guide these meetings and come up with these wonderful presentations for you. As I mentioned today, we have a wonderful presentation. We will have all of these presentations as well as previous presentations in addition to all of our slides, any content that we have on our new LinkedIn group. So make sure that you join us on there. Very, very new. If you are friends with me or you're linked up with me on LinkedIn, you can definitely find it through my page. So today we actually have a topic on generative design. We have an incredible lineup of industry experts, all of which are presenting at Autodesk University, which is next week. It's free to everybody, so hopefully all of you can participate. Today we have, first up, Sophia. Sophia is joined with Eric. They're presenting at Autodesk University on connecting people and algorithms, generative design for informed decisions. Next up, we have Alexandra Nelson with Perkins Eastman presenting. She's a co-speaker with Jacob Small, who's with Autodesk. They're presenting on generative design at Hogwarts using tech instead of magic. Followed up by their presentations, we will have a panelist speaking, not only comprised of our 2 previous speakers, Sophia, Eric, and Alexandra, but we'll also have Lily Smith as well as Raquel Bascones, both with Autodesk speaking 2 different presentations, both on generative design. So before we get started, I will say that we have a winner for today, as usual. We always have our survey participants. We're very happy to have you guys giving us feedback on these presentations. We definitely utilize that for future meetings. Today, congratulations, Kurt Johnston. You win a $25 gift card. Somebody at CAD Micro will be contacting you. Please fill out our surveys for a chance to win next month's $25 gift card. One thing that we do get a lot from our meetings is that the chat is one of the best things about it. So please participate in the chat. We want to hear from not only our panelists and presenters, but from you, also industry experts, about how you use generative design or how maybe you'd like to use generative design. Any comments that you have, questions that you have, we'd love to hear anything from you. We will be giving these once a month for the remainder of the year, as well as through the next year as well. Even if we do go live, we will be doing these virtually and putting the recordings up online for you to access at any time. So once again, first up, we have Sophia and Eric presenting at Autodesk University this year on connecting people and algorithms, generative design for informed decision. They actually join us today from Sweden, so we're very lucky to have them. Hey, Sophia and Eric, can you hear us today?
Yes, we can hear you. Hello there, everybody. Hello, guys.
Thanks for joining us. How's Sweden doing? I guess it's a little later there, about 7 p.m., huh?
Yeah, it's the evening over here, but it's fine. It's nice.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us today. Would love to hear some about your presentation. If you know you have a little bit some slides for us, and while you get that up, I'm going to go ahead and throw out a poll. We love to hear where our participants are calling in from. Of course, if you do not see it on this list, we'd love to hear it from the chat where you're calling from today. We do have some presenters from Europe, so we're very, very lucky to have them. Give you guys a few seconds to get these answered while Sophia and Eric pull up their presentation. Looks like we have some Arizona, Michigan, Austin, Texas. Love to hear for the rest of you guys, I guess the other 7 or 8, Florida, awesome, Nebraska, So sharing the results there. The majority of us are from Maryland and Virginia today. Some from DC, North Carolina. A lot of other state not listed. I love that. Minnesota, Canada, Raleigh, Dallas, Texas. That's fantastic. So without further ado, Sophia, I would love to hear about connecting people and algorithms.
All right, let's start. So you can just see my screen, right?
Yep, sure can.
Perfect. All right, so we will give an industry talk at the AU 2020, and we will talk about connecting people and algorithms, generative design for informed decisions. I'll try to just... All right, so my name is Sophia, and I am graduated from Chalmers University of Technology here in Gothenburg, Sweden. I'm an architect, and I have a master in urban design and a Bachelor of Science in architecture and engineering. And I also have like a background in programming, so I'm trying to like combine the programming field with the field of architecture. And I'm here with my co-speaker Eric. He is actually with distance, but in the same room. And our third co-speaker Anita Apele in Riga, Latvia. So Eric and I, we work as consultants for Bonava, and Anita is employed by Bonava. So Bonava is a residential development company in the Northern Europe, and they have been creating homes and neighborhoods since the 1930s. And they operate in 8 countries around the Baltic Sea. And actually, you can see the spot on the map. Me and Eric, we are here, and Anita is based in Latvia, Riga, over there. So the vision at Bonava is to create happy neighborhoods where people have the highest quality of life. And the mission is to challenge themselves every day to change the housing game, creating better homes and lives for the many. And in order to do that, VDC and virtual construction plays a very important role. So we work a lot with standardization and modularization. We work with something called Bonava parts. So we work with predefined elements, and that could be a wall, for example, and it could be a stair, but it could also be a predefined bathroom as that whole room, or it could be a house. So we work with the Bonava parts, but on different levels, but they are predefined, and we have already all documentations about all of these parts. So the parts are very well defined, but what varies is how they are combined. And that is where generative design comes into the play. So what we want to do at Bonava is to basically flip this workflow, the traditional workflow around. So instead of designing something and then look at what you get in terms of the results, we want to look at the results first and then see what kind of design proposal meet our needs. So we started with single-family housing developments. So Bonava develops single-family housing projects in both Sweden and in Germany. And the houses, as mentioned a little bit before, the houses themselves are predefined and defined as Bonava parts. And that is the perfect prerequisite for generative design. So this is our workflow that we work with at Bonava. So first we have the setup phase, and then we have the generate phase and the evaluate phase, and in the end we have the select phase. And in our presentation at AU 2020, we will guide you through all of these steps, but I'll just do it quite quickly today. So the first phase is about choosing and formalizing rules and constraints. And the setup phase, as I mentioned, we already have the houses. So what we need to define is how they could be combined, how many houses we can have in a row, and basically rules related to houses. And what remains flexible in this case is the site. So for the setup, we have the Bonava parts, we have the plot, but we also have restrictions and regulations for how the parts can be combined. And we have written an algorithm for shuffling these parts on the site. So for each and every project, we define the site boundaries and we shuffle the parts on the site due to certain restrictions and regulations, and the output is multiple design alternatives. So if we go to the next step, which is the generate step, we can have a quick look at what it looks like. So as mentioned, we develop single-family housing units, and here on the screen you can see examples of what it could look like when you do that on a neighborhood scale. So here's a project just outside Stockholm where we applied this on, and you can see a lot of different variations for how the houses are combined. So we generate a lot of different options. And in the end, we generate as much as like thousands of design alternatives. And then you can ask, one can ask oneself, like, what do we do with all of these different alternatives? Of course, we need to look at how they are combined or how they are related to each other. So we go into the evaluation step, and each and every alternative end up with a certain profile in terms of data. So in this example, for example, we have 48 houses. We have a certain distribution between A houses and D houses, for example. We have different orientations of the terraces. We have carports. And then for the key values, we have different aspects at the bottom of this page. So another alternative would end up with another profile, and we call it neighborhood profiles. And a third alternative. And we then put all of the alternatives on top of each other, very similar to the Generative Design tool in Revit 2021. But we are actually not using Generative Design inside Revit. We are using an external database, and we're using Rhino. So we do the setup and we do the definitions in Revit, but we then push it to a database and explore it in a web browser. So then all of the different disciplines can interact with the data. And one thing, I mean, the topic of our presentation is connecting people and algorithms. So for us, it's really important to emphasize who will make the decisions. If you are a cost calculator, you have certain preferences. And if you work with sales and marketing, you would probably look at other aspects in terms of when it comes to the design. And if you work with procurement, you would look at other aspects. So we basically want all of these disciplines to be connected with each other, and we want to connect them by using algorithms. So the evaluations are in the middle, and then the design team is basically centralized around these kind of evaluations. And in the end, of course, we have a connection to Revit. So the last step is about selecting the alternative. And by just typing in a number, you can import everything to Revit. And because of the standardization and modularization, everything is already predefined. So by just saying, I want alternative 75, you will get all of this documentation into your landscape model directly. And of course, one very important question in this is, how should we think about this? Like, is it an evil robot? Or is it good to have digital assistant? And this is something that we try to tell the design teams every time. Like, we're not trying to reduce the work for the architect or anything like that. We don't want to remove the roles. We want to help the architects. We want to help the design teams. We want them to make data-driven decisions. And we are here and using generative design for informed decisions and for helping people. And we also want to connect people, both by we want to connect people with algorithms, but we also want to use algorithms for connecting people with people. So that's a very short presentation of what we're going to talk about. So if you want to hear more, listen to the full presentation at AU 2020.
Well, I'm intrigued already. That was so interesting. I will say I'm very intrigued by some of your early design process. Are you going to be going over that in your Autodesk University? I don't want to steal from your presentation, but I'm very interested in, before you import to Revit, what that process looks like, if that makes sense. So
Oh, you mean the process itself, or?
yeah, like what type of computer programs are you using? You said you're a programmer.
Oh,
What
right,
type of
right.
code are you using? Those types of things.
All right. Basically, we're using Rhino and Grasshopper for using the geometrical engine that they have developed. So we do the definitions of all of the parts. That is defined in Revit. But we then extract information from Revit. We import that to Rhino, and we use Grasshopper for shuffling the parts. We are then using a database called MongoDB. So we take the necessary information from Rhino, push that to MongoDB, and then we have a front end connected to that. So if you then type in like, I want alternative 75, we already know, okay, family type, we know position, we know vector, we know the necessary information for the Revit part basically. So when you type that in, you kind of recreate the alternatives inside Revit, if that makes sense.
That's fascinating. Have you looked into Rhino Inside at all?
Yeah, we're actually using Rhino inside of it.
Awesome. Awesome. And we do have a question from Jean Robinson Jean Robinson that's wondering, will you be discussing how to generate the algorithms within your presentation?
Yes, for sure. We are.
So we'll have to check it out. We'll just have to make sure we check out that presentation. Well, thank you so much, Sophia. And we're definitely looking forward to that. We went ahead, Allison Uza posted a link to Eric and Sophia's presentation, so make sure you register for that. Once again, Autodesk University is free this year. So thank you guys so much. Next up, we have Alexandra Nelson. She comes to us from Perkins Eastman. She actually mentioned right before the presentation that she has moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. So we're going to have to welcome into our Mid-Atlantic user groups down here. So how's it going, Alexandra, or Alex, I guess?
Yeah, it's going great. Thanks for having me today. Appreciate
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. I will say that Alexandra's topic is near and dear to my heart. For those of you guys who know me well, know that I am a huge Harry Potter fan. And Alexandra and Jacob Small are speaking on generative design at Hogwarts using tech instead of magic. So very, very excited to see the full presentation, but very excited as well to see a snippet of it today. So while Alexandra pulls up her presentation, I'm going to go ahead and ask our audience here, what is your discipline? Get a little bit of a better idea about you, our participants, architect, contractor. I will say we've tried to fill in some of the gaps that we had last time for civil engineers and landscapes and other things. So please let us know if for whatever reason your discipline is not seen there or you don't see it represented. We definitely want to make sure that we get you represented next time. So go ahead and share these results. Looks like the most of us are architects. Got some engineers, a mixed lot of engineers and some interior designers. That's fantastic. So without further ado, Alexandra.
All right, great. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks again for having me today. It's good to be with you all, and it was great to see Sophia's work. Really cool stuff. Our lab is titled Generative Design at Hogwarts using tech instead of magic, which is a fun topic. We enjoyed it as well. So my name, let's see here. There we go. My name is Alex Nelson, or Alexandra, either is fine. I am part of a design technology team at Perkins Eastman. I work as a design technology specialist. And today I'm going to go over briefly our AU session that will be available next week. And this is Jacob Small. Sadly, he couldn't be here today with us. He's mostly the brains behind all of this. He's really a great guy. And he's a designated support specialist at Autodesk and was kind enough to ask me to join him in this effort. So our topic really, we have 3 sessions that we go over, but we also go over some of the fundamentals for generative design and really try to outline how the magic works, going off the fun kind of Harry Potter theme. This diagram shows the generative design process and how it works. So you can imagine the Revit data goes into Dynamo for Revit. The resulting graph is built and packed into a new Dynamo file, which is then sent to Generative Design, and then eventually is sent back into Revit. That's kind of just the typical workflow for Generative Design. How this magic works is that basically Generative Design effectively takes the Dynamo file that it was sent and a series of input values and sends them to a headless version of Dynamo Core, which we all know of as like a Dynamo sandbox, for example. And this will happen 6 times concurrently on every study type. So 6 Dynamo sessions will be open at one time with data flowing from Generative Design to each and then from each back to Generative Design. So the evolutionary solver knows how to explore the space. And once the study has this data, the user interface allows us to then pick a given option. So you can imagine that selection being highlighted there at the bottom where there's 4 to 16, 12. These are some parameters that are part of the selection set. So once this selected data is sent back to Dynamo, you can make that selection, it goes to Dynamo, and then from Dynamo, it goes back into Revit to give you something in your kind of 3D model. So in a standard graph, you can imagine we're gathering data, gathering necessary inputs. We're then calculating the kind of data, and we want to make some informed decisions for what we're going to be doing. We then record these decisions, and we have an output, right? That's just the typical standard workflow. But now if we're thinking about generative design, we're actually gathering data first in generative design, but that static input for the study needs to be saved into the Dynamo file. This is where we use the remember node for generative design. And it's crucial to this workflow and kind of how that comes in to preserve it for generative design. It prevents the need to open the Revit file again in order to access that data that's been gathered. We also need to basically vary our inputs. So these need to be marked as an is input and given unique names to work in generative design. From there, we have our calculation bit. This could be a place where we make number or place an instance, but each time the variable input changes, we need to get different results. We then need to evaluate the outcome of the calculation, measure the distance from instance 1, 2, 3, for an example, and this evaluation needs to be set as an output. And basically once we then get our output, we have our selection made, and we go back into Dynamo and use our data gate to then pass through this geometry and this selection, and then we record it again to our 3D model. This is kind of how that data gate works. It prevents the nodes which follow them from executing on our first pass when we're taking it to generative design by passing a single null value instead of the data set, and it prevents content from being recorded. But it does introduce a warning. This means you have to plan on reviewing the warnings actively. One of the important items we discuss in our lab as well is dictionaries and how useful and necessary they are for generative design explorations. They're much faster to compute. They make data easier for us to understand and save time like crazy. In this chart, we're just showing our typical process for bringing our data sets, often from Excel, immediately into a dictionary. This happens at the beginning of our script and makes accessing and adding data extremely easy and efficient. Getting used to using them on complex data sets for generative design is going to be really helpful. Another important item we discuss is just the overall generative design user interface. We've color-coded it here to outline what each section does. So the study selection in orange is where you pick which study you actually want to review. You can also pause, resume studies in this area. The results and configuration in green is where the results of the selected study and view configuration are set. Then you have the grid or list view section in blue, which allows you to toggle between the grid of geometry thumbnails or the results list. The charts view in green allows you to toggle between scatter plot and parallel coordinates for a given study. It enables and disables filters as desired. You have a few different ways to view that there. You have the scatter plot, which adjusts the X and Y axis, size, and color data drivers. You also have a parallel coordinates adjustment where you can sort and order some of these things. And you can hide these docs and resize windows to make more room for them if they get kind of crowded. You also have a details view in purple, which is basically detailed information about the study with a larger geometry preview. Cycle between results is needed. And lastly, the actions bar in red creates a new study, reviews the status of a study that is being reviewed, and opens results in Dynamo. On the bottom right is where you actually select to open in Dynamo. So if you want to then make your selection, you've got that there on the right-hand panel. It then triggers to open it in Dynamo, where you can later push it back to Revit or to another application. We will be talking a lot about permutations and how they can be applied in a useful method for offering slight variation as you're looking to optimize towards a solution in generative design. So with a list of something like ABC, which we are looking at here, you can have ABC, ACB, BAC, etc. This is a factorial design space. That's what's nice about permutations. It's an ordered system, so the digits are swapping in a particular order. And we have 3 sessions during our lab. Each of our sessions uses a different Autodesk application and shows how to access Dynamo and generative design from each of these. The first session looks at generative design in Revit. We go through how to optimize seating in the Potions classroom, and this is what our data set kind of looks like before we start. So you have a model of the classroom with a placeholder for each student, and a spreadsheet that shows information about the student, who they should avoid, who they must be separated from, and what they need to be safe in the classroom. Next, we have a landscape in Civil 3D that we use features from to make decisions on where to locate the Quidditch World Cup Stadium. So this is just taking a site, and thanks to Timothy Logan for the excellent ELK package, which we use to assemble the context design. And this allows you to kind of make informed decisions in a site about where to place the Quidditch World Cup. And lastly, we have a model of Hogwarts Castle, which is pretty fun, and the grounds surrounding it. So this shows a site, and we basically take a 2D site and we look to best lay out creatures on that site. These creatures have requirements similar to our classroom example. You can see in the Excel file here, we look at creatures they need to avoid, how far they can be from the castle, how dangerous they are. All of these things determine what's really required and how to best place them around the Hogwarts castle. And for all of these sessions, we will be walking through our Dynamo scripts. We will take a look at our generative design outputs and how we make our selection. And lastly, we will show how to push the selection back into your models. And of course, we will follow each of these with notes and reviews for how to kind of, what are the big takeaways? Because each of these studies is very different in their own way, and there's a lot we learn from them. So we want to kind of go over that with everyone. And it's also, it's just a fun session, I think, and I hope you're able to join Jacob and I as we present this in full next week. Just as something else to offer here, we have some links that we're providing everyone with. Most of these, a lot of people on the call probably already have access to and are using, but I want to throw these out in case you don't already use them. Of course, the Dynamo resources, but also the generative design resources that are really useful from Autodesk and some others. So the primer, of course, for generative design is really useful, along with some of these other links. So feel free to take a look. But that's all I got for you today. Thank you, guys.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Alexandra. And it looks like John Newbegin already stole my question. Do you share the Hogwarts Castle model anywhere?
I don't see why we couldn't. Yeah, I'll talk to Jacob. I know we share our scripts, and I believe we share the models as well. So yes, I think
do you know how that was created? Was it like a reality capture of like some sort of other model, like maybe at the Universal Studios or something? I don't even know where you would get a 3D model. The Lego castle, right? I could do a reality capture of my Lego castle.
That's true. That's true. I don't know how it was originally created, but what we did is we found a model of it that somebody had worked on in another application, and we rebuilt it in Format, which it's a little bit time consuming, but it was great. I mean, especially with Formit being a new application, it was fun to kind of dive into it and remodel some of this stuff. So it also helped because if we used the other model that we originally had, it was really heavy. So in order to really make use of, again, generative design, needing to optimize your workflow, you've got to reduce everything, including the model sizes, things like that. You just want to simplify it. So that's kind of what we did there.
That would be something fun to crowdsource, right? Just like
Yeah.
open that on BIM 360 for everybody to go in and model. I would partake. I don't know about everybody else. I know
Yeah,
Heather
it's pretty
would
fun.
too. Awesome. All right. So before we get to our panel, I do have a few questions, a few more polls. So I'm going to share this one here, relaunch this here. So how much do you know about generative design? And I guess I pulled this up in the background. Google says generative design is a technology in which 3D models are created and optimized by computer software. Wow, okay. We're getting a few results still, so I'm not going to stop it yet, but I'm very, very intrigued by our results so far. Okay, I'm ending it just because I want to share it. So my first time hearing about it, a third of us, I'm really baffled by that. I'm really baffled by that. But this is awesome that we can share it with you guys and hope you guys can hear about it. And I will say we have just a very small portion of the generative design courses represented here at BIMxt Network. There are tons of generative design courses at Autodesk University this year. And you can also go onto their website and search for generative design courses and get the whole list of them if you'd like. Their website is pretty good this year. So definitely take advantage of that. One more before we get started here. I'd like to know, are you guys utilizing, and I guess for those of you who know what generative design is, and even those of you who don't, is your company using or utilizing generative design? Definitely interested in that. And of course, it could be used for a gamut of things. I know at Smith Group, we've started, not me personally, but our computation group started to do things like we were showing with, the seating charts and making sure that, the spatial distancing are kept and different things like that, wayfinding. So looks like we have 28% that are using generative design. That's really good to hear that we're already starting to embrace that technology. So stop sharing those. Next up, want to get a brief introduction to you guys on Lily Smith. Lily Smith joins us today from Massachusetts. She's with Autodesk, and she's actually giving a presentation called Generative Design in Revit. Very broad and very interested in hearing more about that. How are you today, Lily?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. I'm from DC.
How was my definition? Oh, you're from DC.
I'm virtually going home a little bit. But.
There you go. Absolutely. I love it. Well, welcome home. So I would love to hear, how was my definition? Probably way too broad.
So my talk is, so I'm a product manager at Autodesk, responsible for the generative design and Revit tools. So my talk is really a product briefing. And so going over what people are using it for, I have 3 use cases of customers using generative design in Revit, and then talk about what we're working on and what's on our roadmap for next. And I also I love your polls here, and I have a poll in my presentation at the end where I really want to get everybody's feedback on our roadmap. So I would love for you all to come. If you can't come or want to just do the poll, you can do that too. One note on AU this year. So obviously, if you've been to AU before, you know that we have a long history of having it in person at Vegas. It's never been virtual before. This is our first year virtual. There are, last I looked, over 75,000 people registered for this event. So they're really trying to make this so that a lot of people can attend. And a lot of the formats of the talks are that they're recorded. So you can watch them when you want, depending on what time zone you're in. You can watch them at 2 times. You can, stop and take care of your dog or your kid. So know that. But we also are having some live Q&A sessions. And I think, so Sophia, you have a class, right? And do you have a live Q&A session too?
No, it's not a live Q&A. It's on the page, basically.
And then the lab that Alex just talked about, that's live, right?
We pre-recorded that lab and we're doing a live Q&A session.
Okay, cool. So that lab will be great because then you can, if you get confused, you can stop. And also it sounds, Alex, like so much fun. I'm going to do that lab myself. So if you want to meet the team at Autodesk that makes generative design, you can come on Thursday at 5 o'clock Eastern. We're going to have the whole team there answering questions about the product briefing. So would love it if you guys want to show up for that. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to see everybody. It's just going to be like our faces on whatever platform they have, and then you write in your questions. But we really hope that people will come and we can have still have a good discussion that way. I guess with 75,000 people, that's kind of how you have to do it. Another thing I wanted to point out is that if you've been to AU in the past, the Dynamo team, which I work with at Autodesk in Boston, we often have a party and we've called it Dyna Noche, Dyna Night. This year we're calling it Dyna Zoom. And I don't know how much of a party it's going to be. I think it's at Thursday at 1:30 p.m. But we're hoping to have it be where we have a lot of computational design people get together and then have small breakout rooms where people can talk and just have it be very informal, but a way to connect with people in this huge audience of 75,000 people. So look for those things and would love to be able to connect with you all in this virtual world because I'm going to very much miss seeing people in real life, but hopefully we can make it work at AU next week.
That's definitely the saddest thing about the conferences going virtual, right? Is you miss all the connections that you make and the new networking opportunities and all of those things. But that sounds awesome. I'm definitely going to have to look out for this Dyna Zoom because I always love those events. They're always such a great time. So I'm sure you guys will find a way to make it really fun, even virtually. Awesome. Well, next up we have Raquel Bascones, and she's coming from Barcelona. So not only do we have people from Sweden today, we have some people from Spain today. So that's awesome. She is actually presenting. She's with Autodesk as well in Spain, as I mentioned, and she's actually presenting on generative design. Find her presentation name here as I misplaced it. It is the Non-Geek's Guide to Optimizing Daily Workflows with Generative Design. So I know that's definitely something that I've been pushing to my computation team at Smith Group. Very, very excited about that one. How are you doing today, Raquel?
Hi, good evening from Barcelona. Thank you for having me. And yes, it's a really long name, really long title for a class. I'm presenting with my colleague Paulo Serra. And we wanted to showcase how everybody can use generative design. So it's not only for people doing really cool stuff like Sophia and Eric, but it's something that could be for everybody. Okay, so we are presenting 6 examples that are ready to use. So we are sharing our scripts and you can download and use them right away. And we are showing how with little knowledge of Dynamo, you can do many things. You don't need to know Python. You don't need to know any other programming language to start working with generative design and taking its advantage. Paulo and I, we are consultants at Autodesk. We work with EMEA customers, and we have been working with generative design for quite a long time. So we are also sharing some tips and tricks after working with many customers. So we are really excited. We put a lot of effort in this class. It's been a bit of stress. I'm sure that the rest of the speakers are thinking the same, because we were asked to put the recordings together like quite early in mid-October and all the materials, and it's been a race. But I'm really excited because next week, Thursday, we are having this live Q&A. So I really encourage you to watch the recording and then join it. Maybe it's too early for you because I think it's like midday my time, EMEA time, so quite early in the morning for you maybe. But I think the Q&A will be recorded as well in case you cannot join.
Yeah, I think the
Awesome.
Q&As are going to be available for 30 days. Is that right? After?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And also, so the pages for the classes are already live, so you can go and bookmark the classes that you want to attend, and you can start interacting with the speakers by typing comments, and we will be answering them.
Awesome. Can you give us an example of maybe just a few of those 6 generative design examples you're going to go over? Or we have to go? We have to go to the
You have to go, but I can give just a hint. So one of my favorite ones is toilet design. So we have a room in Revit, and we look at options to set up all the elements, toilet, the sink, the bathroom, the bathtub, and how to combine them and how to place them. And we are optimizing things like, of course, we don't want them to clash. We want to have like the use area to actually use the element. So things that like many architects are using. And other example is how to set up scope boxes. So for example, for big project or master planning, how to optimize the location of the scope boxes. So I'm sure that if you have worked in really big project, as I have in master planning, sometimes you have like seats where you have only a corner of the project, and it's really annoying having to have an extra seat for that. So we developed this workflow to optimize that.
That's it. I know that as someone who has had to create those match lines and scope boxes and figure out how best to optimize that on the sheet, that would be so helpful. I feel like I've spent days just figuring out how best to fit something on a sheet. So that's such a wonderful practical example. Can you give us any other maybe examples that you see as someone who's going and seeing some firms and seeing what people are doing in generative design? Maybe some common things that you see people doing within the industry with generative design?
So the thing is, when working with our customers, usually they go for like really complex workflows, like, okay, I want a whole station to be built, and we work in this kind of project. So that's why Paulo and I discussed, hey, let's do something for everybody. Okay, let's showcase how this tool is for everybody. Like even if you are doing like really like small projects like housing, or you can use it, you can utilize it for normal or like regular task.
Right, absolutely. And I love to see even the high scale of something like Sophia and Eric, what they're presenting of, just this elaborate site like master plan. But Sophia, Eric, do you guys get down into the nitty gritty in terms of even some of those parts and pieces of the homes and single family homes and things like that, the toilet rooms, the kitchens that you're optimizing?
No, not really, because that's the thing. We have already predefined the whole house. So the toilet is where it is basically. So everything is predefined. So what we shuffle on the side is basically the shell. And then we know the reference points for all of the other elements inside that volume.
And so essentially within Revit, it's just placing a kit of parts, right?
Exactly.
Kit of parts that you guys have already predefined as workable components, if you will. Exactly. I would love to get into your Revit model and see what those components are. Like, are they families in themselves?
Yeah, is responsible for that. So, yeah. But
I just want to add to that as well.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Eric.
So in our AU presentation, we also talk a little bit about our generative design for multifamily housing. And there we actually go more into like the actual parts themselves, and not only like the master plan, the more detailed level. But that's for the AU presentation.
Well, and I guess to both of you, optimizing and giving the designer more, just basically a better idea of what the possibilities are. I mean, it seems like it could be endless. Do you guys cap that at all? Is there, certain criteria of matching your parameters that you look at to narrow down that scope? What are some of those? And once again, if this is like, Danny, you have to come to our presentation to see all of that, please just tell me.
Yeah, we actually discussed that earlier today, and we don't have a defined answer to the question, because if you have a really small site, you don't end up with that many different alternatives. But if you have a super big site, then it's quite hard to evaluate the different alternatives. So one question that we're going to discuss with our design team tomorrow is like the sizes of the scales and what's relevant for applying generative design on neighborhood development. So some scales are too small. Of course, you get a lot of different alternatives, but they are very similar to each other, and it doesn't make such a big difference to apply it. But if you have a too big scale, then it's also quite hard to get an understanding of what the difference actually is, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we are actually elaborating with that question at the moment.
Right. How do you even define that criteria and make it so that it, you can define that criteria regardless of the project, right? Because that's just probably a lot of the time with not only generative design, but computation. How can we apply a, workflow to many different processes or projects, right?
Yeah, I would say that I think one of the hardest parts of generative design is actually find a good balance between what you want to allow and what you want to. So you want to find a big design space, right, and evaluate a big design space to be able to get a lot of different alternatives. But at the same time, you want all the alternatives that you generate to be relevant, right? You don't want to generate alternatives that you wouldn't choose anyway, right? So find a good balance between what you should allow and what you should maybe not allow in your scripts. I think that's something that we're working a lot with, and together with the designers and the architects.
Something we came across too in the work we were doing is that you have to be careful, I guess, of competing kind of goals as well, because you can be pushing one way for one reason and pushing the other way, so you kind of end up in the middle. And so sometimes we found it useful to work towards one goal in one scenario, but kind of break down the optimization into kind of almost phases or different parts.
Absolutely. And almost just to kind of, you as yourself as the designer, to be able to understand what those priorities are in terms of the parameters that you're setting and the data that you're collecting, right, Alexandra, based off of that graphic that comes to mind when, you see those flow charts and, minimizing those errors or those margins, I should say.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Lily, what about you? Do you see anything in terms of the industry that maybe people are doing pretty regularly with generative design, or you're getting a lot of questions about in terms of how generative design can help them in their daily workflows?
We see people doing kind of all kinds of different studies, which is one of the reasons why we took the approach of making a solution that was built on a visual programming language, right? Where you can program your own designs, right? Like that's the critical, your design algorithms are the critical thing, and we just provide the automation and the tracking of them. But we see a lot of people really interested in doing in terms of architecture, people interested in doing space planning and doing massing. We are really interested in helping people do environmental analysis and doing, early stage design analysis using these tools. We think are a lot of really good workflows. But yeah, I mean, sky's the limit. And the Hogwarts examples of, I love it just shows that you can do, you can do so many different things with these tools.
Can you tell anything about the roadmap? Anything that you can share in terms of what we can see in the future for generative design?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in like Sophia's presentation about being able to bring more people into the decision process by using data-backed designs that you've generated is really, really interesting to us. And we're really trying to, on our like big roadmap is the idea of, introducing automated design techniques for, what they're good for. They're not good for everything, as you all know, but like some things they're very, very good for, manipulating values a little bit and seeing how that changes and just identifying your goals and being able to include stakeholders in these decisions where you have data is really something that we are really interested in getting better and better about, and being able to share data with more people we think is a really interesting part of the roadmap. And then, the tools are new, and at least in, generative design and Revit was just launched in 2021. And, generative design workflows have been around, and this idea of doing automated design exploration like this has been around for decades, but having the tools.
Project Fractal, Refinery, right? A lot of the exploration, even that Autodesk has done.
Yeah, and generative artists, have been doing this kind of thing since the like 50s, 60s. But introducing, making these tools really easy to get a hold of and use, we're really interested in having, a large audience and a large number of people who can put their ideas in how to use these tools.
So it looks like we have a few questions, maybe for you particularly. How much of the process are you showing to your clients versus using purely internally within the design team? A little bit confused by that, Sarah. So maybe are we, when Autodesk is actually generating these generative design processes, how much are they actually sharing with the client versus just giving them a packaged, I'm sorry, less for Autodesk, more for the other speakers. Okay. So that puts it better into perspective. Sophia and Alex, how much would you guys say, would you share with this elaborate generative design process and some of the, Rhino and the computational different programs that you're using in terms of even just educating them on this basis? Or are you just kind of showing them the end result and just saying, oh, look, these are our optimized, we're so smart, here's our result?
Like from in our presentation, I think we present a lot about the logic behind the algorithms rather than exactly how the nodes in Grasshopper are connected and these kind of things. And we've written a lot of code in C#, and we're not going to go through all of that kind of details. But in our presentation, we talk a lot about the logic and how to translate architectural expertise into something that is understandable for a computer. So it's more like that perspective in our presentation.
At our firm, we're doing a lot right now in terms of even, whether it's computational design or just we have a data unit team that actually works hard to kind of crunch numbers. If it's not generative design, it's for something else. Generative design is still new to us, actually, but I think the way, similar to what Sophia said, I think we really like to use Power BI when we can to really showcase an overall picture and to not dive in too deep to the process. If people like to know more, it's always fun to bring people in when they want to engage more. But I think Power BI really is just something that enables us to connect and communicate really easily to clients. And also the fact that it's very interactive allows us to talk through solutions or possible scenarios. So that's kind of where we are right now. We also use Power Apps as a way. Jose Miguel at our firm is using Power Apps in a really interesting way where we're getting client input. So we have sliders and things that are actually exporting then an Excel file, which you could imagine could be imported directly into generative design. So there's so many unique ways that I think you can engage clients on the front end and on the back end to make it just like an easier conversation.
Awesome. Well, we have another minute here. I do want to launch this poll. We asked about your company and whether your company uses, let's see if I can get this going here. Doesn't want to let me. Looks like it's maybe frozen up on me. Am I sharing results somewhere? Do you guys see results somewhere? All right. Well, before I do that, okay, got a sharing error. Before I do that, I do want to share the presentation names up here again. Make sure that you guys are registered for AU if you are not already. Go ahead and ask you guys to register. All of this information is also on the LinkedIn website that I was referring to, the BIMxt Network LinkedIn website. So you can definitely find that. So this poll here is, have you ever used generative design? So we asked about your company in particular, but we're actually asking about you. And it looks like a good amount of people here have used it. So once again, we're kind of in that third, have played around with it. So that's fantastic. I'd love to hear from you guys in terms of what some of the things you guys are doing. Please connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you there. We will have to thank our AU presenters for sharing today and giving us a little snippet of their presentation. So Alex Nelson, Eric and Sophia, Raquel Bascones and Lily Smith, thank you guys so much. Once again, to our participants, thank you so much for joining today. Thank you for being part of the conversation. Make sure you register for AU. Once again, it's free. Join the 75,000 others who have registered if you have not yet. So thank you guys all, and we'll see you next month.